Good afternoon and welcome to the Chthonia Wednesday live stream. I'm Breach Burke and today is the 5th of March 2025. I guess for some people that's the beginning of Lent. That's the thing that they're doing today. Because I'm thinking, what is today? It's Ash Wednesday. I mean, the day means a number of other things to me, but certainly that was something I'd kind of forgotten about. And then I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is happening today. Yeah, today is going to be the usual Chthonia updates, and I have a few big ones actually to discuss. And then we're going to jump into the topic of today's live stream, which has to do with Saturn and Nemesis. I've done a podcast. The recent podcast this week was on Nemesis, and the one prior to that was on Saturn, who is not Saturn, but it was often considered to be a companion or spouse to Saturn, at least in some versions of her mythology. So I was thinking a lot about these two planets in connection to their roles. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And afternoon, Alex, good to see you. Seeing who's jumping on today. I imagine more people will jump on as we go. We do actually have a moderator who occasionally can make these. I mean, if she can make it, she will moderate, and that is Mango Witch. Thank you very much. And there she is. Hello. Thank you so much. And I very much appreciate you being a mod on these sessions because it's, it just helps things go along here. And hello. So, okay, let's start today with Chthonia updates. So the updates that I have for today is Chthonia. I have to make a pretty big move with Chthonia. I'm about to renew everything on, I'm so happy you're here too. I'm going to be renewing, I have to renew my domains and my licenses and everything for Chthonia.net. And right now I use WordPress for everything. And WordPress, frankly, for what I need it for is overkill. So now that the huge bill that comes up for all the domain renewals and everything, which is close to like $800, I'm like, you know what? I don't need this much firepower for what I'm doing. Because a lot of my e-commerce now I just do through SquareUp, and anything that I do through because the only thing I'm selling right now is stuff through Chthonia Books. Most of it you can get direct from the distributor, or you can get it through a bookseller, being that they're through a distributor. One of them is on Amazon only, which kind of sucks, but there's most of them are that way. And I do have some copies that I keep and that I sell of my own work. So so I'm going to probably be I usually do that through Square. I have my own inventory links and everything, rather than running an e-commerce platform. So other than that, it's the podcasts and it's just the information and updates about what I'm doing. So I'm probably going to move over to Wix, mainly because everything else I have is on Wix. So, and I know some people absolutely hate Wix, but but again, this is not going to be where you log in, have an account, do stuff on the page. It's just going to be informational. So that kind of works out for me. I thought, that would be okay. And hello, Joanne, you're here. Good to see you. So, so we're going to, I'm going to probably be doing that. Now, the only complicated piece of that is migrating Chthonia.net email. It may not be that complicated. I have to look into the details, but right now everything is kind of linked to that. So I want to make sure, and their email is actually pretty terrible. So I just need to make sure that if I'm migrating, that I need to be able to keep that username, that there's not going to be a problem with switching the domain over and all that kind of stuff. And so, but because when I got the price tag this year on the renewal, I'm like, this is an obscene amount of money for almost nothing. And a lot of it's a lot of extra stuff that I just don't need. And yeah, I know you can take some things off, but Bluehost kind of packages everything together, and you have to have certain types of security and everything. So, anyway, I'm thinking about making that change. Of course, this week I'm trying to catch up with courses. Next week, my students are on spring break, and I don't teach another class. This is regular university teaching until the 24th of March. I start a new class, That's what I've been trying to get done this week. And then I need to finish all my grading and get those students caught up before their midterm. So yeah, so I'm basically trying to keep up with all of this work, and it's been very, very busy. And speaking of schools, the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth, the spring semester begins on March 15th. This one's, the timing's a little weird on this one because it's going to be from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern, which is actually later. Most of them are going to be 11 to 1 Eastern, but it's because Kate is in Canada and she's in the West Coast. So she did not want to be teaching before noon on a Saturday, and frankly, I don't blame her. So that will be starting. The thing is, I would like to know from people, if you could email me, and I did put my email address in the description of this live stream, if you are planning to take classes. Now, some people have already told me, and some people I know Joanne's in, and a couple of people have told me, oh yeah, I'm planning on taking, certain courses, maybe not the full term. So I just want to know what people's intentions are, because right now I don't know if there's enough to warrant it. And I know Kate has said to me, if we're not going to end up running this, let me know, because she's going to be putting a lot of work in this weekend to get ready for the next weekend. So if people can let me know by Saturday, let's just say Saturday morning-ish, what you're planning on doing, so I can let Kate know what we're doing, if we're still going to be thumbs up and going ahead, or if we're going to decide to postpone, although fall is going to be, fall's very iffy. Actually, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in the fall. Fall might have to be a hiatus. We'll see. But in any case, if you are planning on taking classes, instituteforfemininemyth.org is where all the information is about what's being taught. You can look at the course curriculum to see what's offered this semester. And again, the full term is not really, for what it is, it's not very expensive. Honestly, a lot of it's just so I can pay stipends to the professors who work with me, because I feel like they should get something for their time. And I would love to see it expand, but I don't know how much the word is getting out. So I'm probably also going to put a community post here and something on Instagram and Facebook as well, just to kind of get the word out on that. So I do want to let people know, because if it is something you are saying, oh yeah, I'm intending to do it, I just haven't done it yet, then I need to know that, so that I'm not, so that I don't end up canceling it and you were going, oh, but I plan to register. So yeah. And again, I'm hoping not to cancel it. There are people who are very much interested in what's going on. It may or may not suit everybody, time-wise and all that. But yeah, so that's the situation there. So yeah, clearly a lot going on there. And yeah, I'm not going to talk about the fall at this point, because there's some things I want to sort out before I really get into that, what's happening with that. But okay, so those are my little updates for Chthonia for right now. And if anybody still wants to buy some of my books, I think I have Archetype Possession, Regenerator, Morgan Timelines, and Maeve. I think I have copies of those that are still available for sale. I think I'm sold out of Project Lethe right now. I mean, again, you can still order these things, through Amazon, through your local bookseller, through an Ingram link. I think I have them still on the Chthonia.net website. They're still listed as Black Friday, but I'm still going to sell them at the same price, and they would be autographed. So I still do have a few copies left. I better order my shirts before they go to Wix. Well, the shirts are still going to be, thank you for bringing that up, Joanne. The shirts, merchandise for Chthonia and for the ISFM are still, it's on spring. It's in the spring store. And so it's, I think it's creator, that link is also in the description for Chthonia.net. And also, if you go on Instagram, if you go into my bio, there is a link for merch. And so that is also there. So yeah, so there's not going to be, I guess, Joanne, there's not going to be any e-commerce, thank God. There's not going to be any e-commerce piece on Wix for Chthonia.net. And yeah, Spring Store is just, I think I have a link to it on the main website now. But yeah, if somebody actually wanted to get those, because the t-shirts are cool. I mean, the ISFM logos and stuff, I have t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, stuff like that. And then I also have all the Chthonia ones, which has J.R. Malpare's really cool designs, and my logo, and there's two of them. There's the crow logo, and then there's the woman logo, a woman sitting there looking at the crow. He did both of those. In fact, as I've been cleaning out, I just found the originals of both of those that he had created for me. So those are my logos, and yeah, those are on a whole bunch of merchandise as well, if you want to get those. So, okay. So our topic for today, now that we've gotten through our updates, is Saturn and Nemesis. Now, okay, in the last, as I mentioned at the beginning of this live stream, in the last couple of Chthonia releases, shall we say, because we did Lewis Attorney a couple weeks ago, and then we did Nemesis. Now, Lewis Attorney is not Saturn, okay? But Lewis Attorney is sometimes seen as the spouse of Saturn, or her functions sometimes are seen as being connected to Saturn in some fashion. Sometimes she's just called Lua, sometimes she's called Lua Mater. But again, there's that whole podcast is out there. Now Joanne says Wix hates me. Oh, I know you have some of those issues with the classes and everything too. So yeah, there's some people who just the login thing should be straightforward, but it's not. So in any case, we talked about these two figures over the last couple of weeks, and the thing about these two is I was thinking about them after I did the Nemesis podcast earlier this week, actually. I started to think about the functions of the two of them, because to a certain degree, when we talk about Saturn and Saturn's astrological influence, we always talk about Saturn as a lord of karma. Okay, the idea that you are going to that Saturn is a correcting kind of a force. And when you think about Nemesis is also a correcting kind of a force. Nemesis is one who distributes. So in other words, distributing according to what you're actually owed. So what this means is that Nemesis would be connected to not only you getting things that getting the fortune, getting retribution for people maybe who do things that are wrong, people who aren't brought to justice, people who are greedy and take too much. She's often connected with envy, because the idea is that when people who are envious are going to check people who have too much, which sounds kind of weird because we don't think of that as being a positive emotion, right? We think of that as being a negative. We say, oh, well, what they have. Well, it can depend. The interesting thing is that there's the idea that somebody's fortune needs to be checked is what Nemesis has to do with. And as I mentioned in the podcast, Nemesis is frequently seen as a force that is, Nemesis is connected to, we think of her as being kind of a foil or a villain, like when somebody is your nemesis, right? It's the person who wants to make sure that you don't get ahead, right? Or is in competition with you, or is like an enemy of some kind. Okay, we always think of Nemesis in an enemy sense, but it's worth remembering in Rome, she was often referred to as a Nemesis Fortuna. And so she was the idea of, and she ended up being connected, as all things did, with the emperor, the kind of retribution bestowed by the emperor, and also any gifts that were given, because Nemesis is intimately connected to Tyche, or fortune. And fortune is what your lots are, what you're going to get. And your fortune, because we always think of fortune in a fortunate kind of way. If you're fortunate, it means, hey, you've got good luck, right? Like your luck is good. Things are good for you. And some people seem to be born with better fortune than others. And, it's a matter of, a lot of times we do have a mythology in this country that what you achieve through hard work. Okay, that it's hard work and your efforts, that your actions and your efforts are meritorious. What you earn is based on what you've put out. So the effort that you make is rewarded. The problem is, a lot of times this simply is not true. There may be people who are born into families with a lot of money. They're able to start with a lot of money. They'll be able to do things big. If you try to do the same thing that they do, you may put in 10 times the effort, but because you don't have the connections, the financial backing, that clout, you're not going to do as well. And they may not even know what the heck they're doing, and somehow they're going to go do much better than you because they can hire all the people, and they can, they have all like I said, they have all the connections who will like set it up and do it for them. I've always said about the Argonautica, which is which is probably said to be one of, even though our actual written version of the Argonautica is much later. I believe it's in the Roman period that we see a written version of this. According to Herodotus, the whole story of the Argonautica is very old. They consider that to be almost Greek prehistory. And if you look at all the characters, it kind of makes sense. But I've often said about that Jason, I mean, yes, Jason has some things he has to endure, but he's born into this royal family. He's got the support of Hera, which is like, wow, like nobody has that. But that's because as he's crossing a stream, he sees this old woman who needs help, and he goes over and he says, oh, let me, and he helps her across, and it happens to be Hera in disguise. So of course she's very pleased that he would do the right thing, and he loses his sandal in the process. But the idea of him coming with just one shoe, which now is kind of reminding me of Monty Python's Life of Brian, but the fact that he shows up with this is kind of a designating that this is like the prophecy that he's going to be the next king. And so he gets some, back and forth about, oh, are you the, are you going to be the one or not? But the thing about the Argonautica is throughout that entire epic, he has like this all-star cast of people on this ship. And by the way, the ship is magical too. It's made from Dodona oak. And Dodona, yeah, you just went there too, Joanne. The Dodona oak is supposed to be that, like, literally the trees. This is an ancient oracle, and the trees are supposed to be prophetic. Like, so literally, the wood that the Argo is made from is supposed to be able to prophesize. And he's got like a zillion prophets and all of the fathers of all the great heroes on the boat with him. And the bottom line, though, is ultimately Jason really doesn't do much of anything. Everybody else does the fighting on his behalf. And even when it comes to his main task, which is to get the Golden Fleece, then it's Medea who actually does all of the work. And then he rewards her by, when he's granted it, when Creon says he can have a more fortunate marriage than with that other one, he's just kind of like, well, I'm leaving you and the children, get over it. And of course, that doesn't end well. But yeah, so Jason to me is, I bring him up because he is one of those who is, he's considered to be heroic, but he's really not. He was just, he was surrounded by people who did everything for him. Now, in the end, he wasn't fortunate because of that. His fortune was checked, right? So, okay. So the idea of Nemesis is the idea that your fortune is, it's the idea that your fortune is somehow, what you call it? That there's going to be a limit on your fortune. Okay. And Saturn, we also see in this role as having a limiting kind of a force. And hello. So Saturn's this limiting kind of force. So you've got this. So Saturn himself is a complicated figure because Saturn is not only there's Saturn and then there's Kronos. And because of the kind of crossover or the cross sections between Greek and Roman mythology, we tend to say Kronos equals Saturn, but that's not exactly the case. Kronos, if we think about the story of Kronos, he is a child of Uranus, which we say Uranus in the Roman, and Gaia, or the Earth Mother. And this was when they were mating, when they were united, when the heaven and the earth were not separate from each other. And but Uranus did not like most of his children, especially like the Cyclops and the ones with 100 hands and things. He thought these great giants. He thought that they were horrible, and he kept trying to stuff them back into the earth. Now, Gaia didn't really care for this. She was just kind of like, try to imagine the way that my mythology teacher in grad school had put it, and heaven and earth equals time. Yes, exactly. That's where I was going to be going with this, Stephen. That she didn't like this. The way it was likened was that the children were being kind of, it's like if you were trying to give birth and somebody was trying to stuff the baby back inside of you. That's kind of what was happening. So Gaia is just like, no. So Kronos she calls upon one of her children to help, and he says, I'll do it. And so she gives him a sickle, which kind of interestingly, the carved sickle almost reminds you of the moon and the phases of the moon, right? So speaking of time, just like Stephen said there. And so he, basically undoes Uranus's ability to continue to procreate. We'll just put it that way. and it falls into the ocean, and then all these other giants and things come out of that, and also the goddess Aphrodite. That's a whole separate story. But yeah, what Kronos does with his sickle is he cuts heaven and earth apart. He creates a separation, and that is separation means that we are now in a field of time. You know, when heaven and earth are, when all everything's unified, you're not in the field of time. You're not even necessarily in the field of space as we would think about it. It's not the same kind of a construct. So, and to be in the field of time means that you are dealing with measurement. Okay, you are measuring. We measure days and hours and moon cycles and solar cycles, and all of this kind of stuff gets measured. So Saturn has, a lot of the early Titans too, like Creus, for instance, has to do with measurement and how we measure things. And so therefore, what else is measured? Well, when we think of the Fates or the Moirai, other children of Nyx besides Nemesis, these are the ones who measure out the length of human life. You know, once humans become a thing and mortals are now part of the equation, there is a measured period of time. You do not go beyond the years that you are allotted. If you go with the biblical version, I think that's, what is it? It's 80 and 10 or something. It's basically 120 years, I think, is what it comes out to. And it's so yeah. So there's a certain allotment of years that you cannot go beyond. And so Saturn tends to represent this as a force of time. Time, he usually carries like a sickle or a scythe, you know, like the idea that you would use for the harvest, which is what sometimes makes people connect Saturn to death. But we have to remember that Saturn also in the Roman, okay, so that's Kronos. And Kronos, by the way, okay, so he goes on to not necessarily be a much better ruler of the universe than Uranus, because he starts devouring all his children as soon as they're born. So, you know, he doesn't totally learn the lesson from his dad. And so he's devouring all of his children. And as he devours them, you know, and then eventually his wife gets tired of this. Rhea gets tired of this. And she says, so she gives him a stone to swallow. And then Zeus ends up getting kind of hidden away in a cave. And, you know, he's got the little, what do they call them? The Calibri, I can't remember what their name is, but there's these little dwarves who come and they make a lot of noise. And I think I was talking about them last week. I don't know why I can never remember their name off the top of my head, but so Saturn doesn't hear the baby crying, right? Or Kronos doesn't hear the baby crying. And eventually this is the son who gets into the war with him, the war of succession, and they get into this battle. Now, but what people don't tend to forget about this battle, which is eventually won by Zeus, and then now you have the reign of the Olympians as being the 12, and of course the 12 does refer to the solar cycle. Okay, that this notion of order in the universe, taking time as an ordering principle rather than as a devouring one, right? Although it really is both. And so when Zeus does this, Kronos is actually considered to be, he is the one who rules over the Elysian fields. It's not like he's confined to Tartarus. He rules over the Elysian fields, which is a place of, in the scheme of Hades, that was the better place to go, because it was it had things. It had, nice feasting and pretty scenery. It was a little bit reminiscent of being on life on Earth. I mean, it's not the same, but but Saturn ended up ruling over that realm, or Kronos. And then later on, when the mythologies got mixed together, when you had the idea of Roman mythology picking up the Greek myths, because Roman religion does not really, by definition, Roman religion does not have, it was not the type of religion that had a mythology. Initially, they didn't. Basically, everything was alive, and the Etruscans are very much like this too. Everything happens because a god of some sort or a demonic spirit is driving something. And so that's why everything happens. So so Saturn, yeah, he ends up taking on a lot of the characteristics of Kronos. He does have to do with time. He has to do with the harvest. When we think about it, we think about the cycles of time. You plant seeds, they grow, you harvest them. If you don't harvest them, then you don't get there's no benefit of the fruit, because obviously that's another thing about being alive, is that in order for us to live, things have to die. So you have to kill the crop and then replant or resow the next year in order for life to continue. So death is required for life. It's a cycle. It's a requirement. You can't say like, oh, when you hear things about, we're going to conquer death or get rid of death, you can't get rid of death. And that brings me to another interesting story that I wanted to connect to this. And I did talk about this on the Morning Coffee with Breach over on my other channel, because I was thinking about this more in astrological terms. But I was thinking about the story of Swarbanu in Hinduism, which is the story of Rahu Ketu. Okay, and so what happens with Swarbanu? Well, he shows up at he's what they call an Ashura, a demonic type spirit. Although, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself endlessly, but demonic means something different in Hinduism. It's more of a spirit that is more focused on material things, on power, on gain, uses power for that rather than power for things that are more auspicious or that are beneficial to the larger group. Ashuric forces tend to be very greedy and want to gain power and say, hey, I'm the most powerful one. And one of the things that Ashuric forces tend to want is to be immortal. They want to be outside of time. And the gods have decreed, no, they can't be outside of time, because if they were to go on forever, I mean, there would be no hope of ever overcoming these kinds of forces if they were able to do that. The whole idea is that, kind of in their own nemesis-like way, they need to be knocked down at some point, or there has to be the ability of an avatar of Vishnu to be able to come in. And Vishnu in particular, because he is the preserver of the world. Okay, he's not a creator, he's not a destroyer, he's the preserver. So what happens is Swarbanu shows up at this, manages to sneak in somehow to this gathering of the gods, where they are drinking the Amrita, the nectar of immortality. And what happens is Swarbanu ends up drinking the nectar of immortality. And when it's realized, now, again, in the version I've read, it's Vishnu. I have heard other versions where it might be other deities that might have done this. It takes the sword and cuts Swarbanu in half. And the implication almost is that it's interesting, because when they show it in say, drawings, and when you see it in Indian iconography, he's always represented as a person. Usually they represent the Ashuras as being kind of men with, dark hair and dark beards. But we also hear about Rahu Ketu as being like a dragon or a serpent. And, serpents tend to have a lot to do with time too. So it gets cut in half. So what happens to Rahu Ketu is you have a head without a body, and then you have a body that doesn't have its head attached. And in that kind of symbolism, the head is the mind. The head is the mind that runs and runs and runs. But the head also can be what we tend to think of as ego, in the sense of believing that our intellect makes us superior, and believing that because we are such clever beings that we can defeat time, which is what Swarbanu is trying to do. I said he's actually very human in that way. And the Ashuras do have qualities that human beings have. Okay, this is not a quality. Both the Devas and Ashuras do represent qualities of the human psyche and in human behavior, among other things. So Rahu Ketu, so Rahu is when Rahu shows up in a chart in Vedic astrology, like we consider Rahu to be the north node of the moon, okay, and Ketu to be the south node. So we tend to see the north node as auspicious and the south node as inauspicious, which is interesting. And Stephen says, believing we aren't one. Yeah, this is it. There's the insight that transcends duality and the insight of duality. It's like we do live in a system where we experience things as separate, but in Hindu system, yeah, that's an illusion. The reality is that it's not separate, right? But Rahu Ketu are split apart in this way. And so now you've got this head that's not grounded in the body. It doesn't have a body to ground it. So Rahu is often seen as an inflationary force, one that thinks it can do more than what it can do. Okay, maybe you see where I'm going with this. And so the idea of this Rahu type energy that is very very ego driven and not grounded in reality. When we think about forces like Saturn and Nemesis, these are forces. Well, first of all, Saturn's the force of time that says, whoa, hold on. There's a limitation to what you can do. right? And Nemesis is the idea if you've amassed too much of something, too much power, too much fortune, too much wealth, if you've become greedy, if you've become power hungry, if you've started to believe that this is why she's actually connected to the sin or vice, or I don't like to use the word sin because they didn't use that word, but the whole idea of hubris. Okay. In ancient Greek myth and in ancient Greek religious belief, the main thing was that you kept order in a certain way. And the way that you kept order, I mean, there was a certain order that was established. That's DK, what the rules are, what you follow, what the ruler lays out that you follow. Okay, and that's why I say ruler. It's interesting. I remember reading this in philosophical work I read. I think it was called On Europe a long time ago. But the idea was that the word ruler, it comes from regere. It comes from the word for king. But a ruler is also a thing we use to measure, right? So that the ruler who lays down the rules and the boundaries, and time is one of those boundaries. Okay, so there's a measurement of not only space but of time. So you have this measurement. So yeah, and so really what we're talking about with both Saturn and Nemesis is this idea of checking unchecked growth. Okay, things can't overtake. Another example of this, I was thinking about the Bible and the concept of the Nephilim. Now, one of the things about the Nephilim is that they will say that they are the result of angels and humans mating. Okay, which again, and as I've said, I personally have an issue with that idea, but I'm not going to digress into that. Regardless of what their origin, the Nephilim certainly are a race of giants. They are a race of supermen of some type. And the way that what the Bible actually will say is some connect them with the heroes of old. Okay, so that the implication is that these demigods that you see in the Iliad, these Achilles, for example, trying to think who else was technically a demigod in there. I think all of them had some kind of claim to divine parentage or divine lineage somewhere. Achilles is the first one that comes to mind, and I'm not remembering the parentage of the other ones, but nonetheless, you have this idea of either this divinely chosen or this child who has a connection somewhere. They're related to a deity that has mated with a human, right? So there's this idea of them as a demigod of some type. And so the Bible says they're like the heroes of old. In other words, they're these forces, these unchecked forces, because they have all the abilities of their divine parent in a way, or they have some abilities. I mean, and yet they're mortal at the same time. But because they are so extraordinary, it's like they can achieve immortality. Hercules or Heracles is another one that you would think of, because he has to perform his 12 labors, and of course he does these fantastical feats. And really, in the end, he's rewarded with immortality. He is probably the only one who is allowed to go to Mount Olympus, maybe other than Dionysus. But he's allowed to go to Mount Olympus and live with the gods. But even though his shade and his memory still lives in Hades, as we find out in the Odyssey, he's raised to the status of immortality because he is a human who overcame his human limitations, and it's because he has this divine lineage. So the idea of Nephilim, now like I said, they're often referred to as this kind of race of giants. But Nephilim, the idea was that they were overrunning the earth, and interestingly, that they were devouring everything, that they were destroying everything. That's one of the things that have been said in some of the apocryphal texts about the Nephilim. So the idea was this is why the flood was sent to come in and wipe them out, because you can't allow that to go unchecked. And honestly, to me, that seems more reasonable just than people weren't nice and God didn't like them, so he sent the flood. It's more that there was unchecked power raging that had to be stopped, that could not be stopped through ordinary means. And so it needed to be stopped. So yeah, so we're kind of seeing them as these kinds of corrective forces. Now, Saturn is a deity. Okay, within the Roman system, he is a deity. He's a deity of agriculture, as well as all the other things that he has picked up from his association with Kronos. And Lewis Chthonia, interestingly, is the one who is like a toxicity that can be sown among the seeds that will actually destroy them before they have a chance to sprout. So Saturn is the one who has to check Lua Saturni from, damaging the crop so that the crop can actually grow. But Saturn is also the one connected with the harvest at the end as well, because Saturn is connected to time. And because we tend to connect the harvest with death, because it is a death of a type, then it tends to end up taking on broader associations that maybe it was or wasn't ever intended to have. So it's interesting. So, but I think it also demonstrates, particularly in the case of Saturn, how close endings and beginnings are. I've often said that one of my more recent taglines is Thanatos and Eros are might be the same being. The drive to create and the destructive drive are part of the same thing. And I'm not speaking psychologically. I'm speaking like mythologically, or in terms of the kinds of forces. Because when you are in this field of time, as something is create, once you have creation, you also are going to have something that's going to at some point be destroyed. It's temporal. It's not going to be here forever. It's not going to live forever. It could live a very long time, but not forever. Now, I do find it interesting that we live in a world now of, and again, I'm not planning on getting political here at all, but maybe just a little, but it's just the idea that we have this group of people. We've been hearing forever about the 1%, right? The 1%, the billionaires who have all the money. And I think it's interesting that one of the things they're working on, in addition to trying to go to other planets and having rockets and things that'll go to Mars and different places, is, and maybe it's Bezos who's doing this, who is wants to work on a formula for immortality. He does actually want to fund something to make people live forever. And I find that rather interesting. First of all, I've seen various arguments. There are some channels I watch, like Tail Foundry, where they were trying to argue that immortality would be a good thing. And I'm like, for who? I don't follow that argument at all. Because to me, why would you want to live forever? Even if you could extend your body, your body's going to require more and more maintenance to go on. And what's the necessity of that? I don't understand why I need to be here for the next, I don't want to be here for the next 1,000 years. I want to be here, or even a few hundred years, or even 100 years. I just whatever my normal lifespan is plenty of time. Thanks. But this idea that we want to keep going unchecked. We want to keep going unchecked. We want to have more. And what we have, that's where greed comes in. What you have is not enough. It doesn't matter that you have a lot. It's still not enough. I have to have more. Okay. There's always that. Think about that. If you have a job and you say, you make a certain amount of money and you think, oh, I'm going to go for this other job because I'm going to make an additional, I don't know, $20,000 a year, $30,000, or I'll make double my salary. It's going to be great. And then you take that job, or you get it, and then you work that job, and now all of a sudden you still don't have enough money. It's the way it goes. I promise you. As I, moved up in my income over the years, even at that time, I'm like, I still have bills. Because somehow, in addition to us having more money, then it's kind of like we either acquire more things or end up with more expenses. Now you've bought that house, now you've bought that car, now you bought this, now you bought that. I mean, and again, those things are necessary to some degree, but, you find that the money you have, it's still like, well, I could still use more. I could still stand to make more. It's never quite enough. So these are the forces of expansion. And I think we live in a culture that says that we need to, like I mentioned in the beginning, hard work is something that we are rewarded for, right? And that is kind of the capitalist credo. It's this credo that and also I shouldn't just say that. It's not just that. It's also, this goes back to what they refer to as the Protestant work ethic. Okay, and this is Malinowski, I think, came up with that phrasing. And the Protestant work ethic is the idea that God rewards those who work hard. And certain aspects of that have fed into what we call prosperity gospel and other things. Oh, I have a lot of things because God is rewarding me for working hard. Okay, that's the idea. And when you hear certain corollary ideas, like people who have to be on public assistance are somehow lazy or shiftless. I always love the welfare queens, who actually have Cadillacs and fur coats and all this stuff, and they're doing it on public assistance, right? Which Yeah, people always who believe that, like, oh no, I know somebody. Okay. I mean, to be fair, I don't know. There could be people who know how to buck the system, but those people, if those people had a lot of money to begin with, we would say what clever business people they are, because they don't have a lot of money. We're like, parasitic, whatever. You know what I mean? It's all a matter of perspective, because when people do that on the business level, we think, wow, what a clever business guy. So yeah, because there's this idea, and then that's kind of the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps. How many times have we heard that? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take responsibility for what you're doing. And again, nobody's saying that people should be irresponsible, but the idea is that some people are born into situations with more fortune and some are born with less. And oftentimes, the way it's suggested is that when you have more, that's I think we pointed out it was like Luke 12 or something. More is expected of you. Now, I'm not trying to get biblical here, but that is where we kind of see this idea that to much who has been given, much is expected. So the way in which abundance applies to everybody. And then Alex says that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Yeah, I know, right? But the idea that what you get, if you are somebody who is blessed with a lot of things, then sharing with others is how not only you have abundance but everybody else does too. It's like everything multiplies because everybody's sharing. It's the old Zohar story of heaven and hell, where the angel takes the rabbi to to hell first, and people have these long spoons chained to their wrists, and they're starving to death because there's a big banquet in front of them, but they can't reach it. So he gets taken to heaven, and it's an identical scene, only everybody's fed because they feed each other. This is kind of where the Nemesis idea comes in. It's the idea that people are allotted a certain amount of fortune. And if you have good fortune, there's a certain amount of good fortune that you may have, but things kind of are cyclical. And if it's like if your fortune is going unchecked, if you are amassing power and money and things at this rate, then it's almost like there's this force, this Nemesis force that comes in and says, you're going to be taken down. And Nemesis officially was the one who checked hubris. Okay. And that is a form of hubris. It's a form of pride. It's a form of that. Hubris was defined as making oneself better than the gods. Okay. And so you have this idea that no, you can't, this cannot go on like this. What is full has to be empty. And then what's empty fills up again. You don't have that kind of a thing. So it's an interesting thing. And I think it comes back to when the focus that people have in life, when we talk about materialism. Now, as somebody who tends to follow Tantra to some degree, in terms of at least the philosophy of it, is that Tantra is about weaving. Okay, so it's about living the ordinary life and still being able to be spiritual. It's not like you have to separate those two things. And Tantra is about saying, life is to be enjoyed. We have nice things, we have, nice luxuries, nice food, nice whatever. And if you have those things, you should enjoy them. It's not that you should, I should abstain from all of those things. That's another way of looking at things. The Buddha would have said that's probably potentially could be another vice too, when people are just too into, fasting and abstaining and, all these kinds of things. So, you can, so, there's this idea that, you can, that you can have things. So I'm not one of those people who says that, the material world is evil and you shouldn't, participate in it, which again, there's another viewpoint. Some people said that that's what the Cathars believed. I have a friend who says, no, that's not exactly what they believed, but nonetheless, there was certainly an idea that came up at one point that was viewed as a heresy by the church, where people said anything incarnate and in this world is evil. Only the spiritual is good, and anything incarnate, like even having children, is bad. Like, you don't do it; it's bad, And but that's kind of the extreme of that way of thinking. And so when we have this, so again, but when something goes unchecked like this, the idea is that there has to be a check on it. Hubris is trying to make yourself better than the gods, to try to have more than the gods. And the gods, if you read any mythology, whether you read Ovid or whether you read Hesiod or whether you read Homer, it doesn't matter who you read, Pausanias, any of them, that doesn't end well. And people think they're going to challenge the gods. And oftentimes in these stories, they directly challenge the gods and say, yeah, what makes you better than me? And then something really appalling happens to them. So yeah, it's not a good idea to make oneself better than those forces. But I think it's less about the gods being, talking about jealousy. It's less about the gods being jealous and more about what are the limitations of mortality? What are the limitations of time? What are the limitations of space? And when you live in this space, these are the limitations. When I think about the Gnostic concept of the archons, okay, you say archons, archons, whatever, however we say it. But the idea is that these are blind angels of the demiurge that tend to rule, that they view those as the planetary forces. And the idea that we are sort of trapped in this sphere with astrology. But I think it's more the idea that this is okay, just like we talk about the limitations of time, I think when we start getting into that, we're talking about the limitations of space too. The limitations of where we live, the environment we live, the solar system we live in with respect to the rest of the universe. What do we live in? What kind of beings are we? What limitations do our bodies have? What limitations do we have in terms of, just what it means to exist in this sphere? And the idea of transcending those limitations, well, there's a lot of, this is where we get into ideas of liberation, right? How do we liberate ourselves from those forces? It's said that one who is who achieves like the equivalent of nirvana or somehow achieves moksha while they're still alive could potentially get outside of that system. But that's a very difficult state to be in. Most people, even if they experience that for a short period of time, it's very hard living in this sphere to function like that, because you are functioning outside of time to some degree. And but yet you're still living in a space and in a body where you're quite limited. So I don't know. So it's interesting. I just found myself thinking about that. I'm just looking at my notes here to see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about with that. But oh yeah, there was one other thing I did want to talk about. And that has to do with, okay, I talked a little bit in both of them about planetary stuff. In one, I talked about the electric universe theory, okay? And that was, which again, I've seen some videos that say, oh no, that couldn't work or whatever. I don't know. I'm not an astrophysicist. I couldn't tell you how meritorious that is. I know it was developed by Nobel Prize winning physicists, but that doesn't mean that it might not have its limitations or its problems. I'm not trying to say that I'm not proponent of it one way or the other. But what's interesting in that theory is the idea of Saturn as a second sun. Okay, there's the idea of Saturn as being like the night sun. And the theory there was that Saturn was a brown dwarf, okay, a kind of a star. And what they think, and they don't know because we really don't have any that are close enough to tell, but there's a theory that a brown dwarf, as it cools, could settle into being what they call one of the gas giants, like Jupiter, like Saturn, like Uranus. I mean, they're all gas planets, okay, and they sometimes will have the rings around them and so forth as well. But in that theory, the solar system used to be ordered in a different way, and Saturn was probably more like the sun than the sun was. In fact, they theorized that at some point in history, human history, I should say, long spans of time, geological history, that Saturn may have actually been the sun. Okay, Stephen says, I always love the idea that Athena, the wisdom, is the offspring of time and method. That is, wisdom is knowledge gained through experiencing space-time. Yeah, and that's true. And Athena does kind of represent that force. She is it's interesting. She's also the goddess associated with weaving. Because she's the one who's able to kind of weave those things together. She's also the one that when she goes out to fight, she's more of a strategist rather than someone who's a straight up, fights with people. She bests Ares, by her strategy, and he's the god of war. Enough to make him go to Zeus and say, "You need to." Speaking of checking, you need to check that daughter of yours. And he says, and Zeus just says to him, "Get out of my sight, I hate you." But anyway, that's a different story. But yes, but Athena definitely, yeah, she's the offspring of time and method, or the, see, who was her mother? Yeah, technically, yeah. Metis was technically her goddess. That was the goddess that she, who was said to be the mother of Athena, technically. And then she springs out of Zeus's forehead when he has a headache because he swallowed Metis. You know. So yeah, but anyway, no, you're right. Interesting point there. So with regard to, okay, so this is what we've said about Saturn. Now, Nemesis, it's interesting. One thing that's coming up with this new James Webb telescope is that as they're seeing farther out and they're seeing things with better resolution, that as we see these things, we are we're finding things out about the universe and how the universe was born, and how people talk about the Big Bang and what happened and so forth. Basically, the way that they are determining the age of the universe and so forth, a lot of it, they're like, it's not, the calculations they have right now, they don't match up. They don't add up with what they're observing. And certainly one of the things that seems to be a part of this, or in question, when we are talking about our solar system and the kind of objects that enter our solar system, or the weird orbits of things out in the Kuiper belt or out in the Oort cloud, the theorized, both of them kind of, well, Oort cloud is theorized, we've not seen it, but we have the movement of objects out there, lines up with the idea that there is another gas giant out there, or some kind of big object, probably a planet, that's got to be at least 5 times the mass of Earth. And again, the theory there is that we're also talking about another potential brown dwarf that has become some kind of a super planet. And the first time this was postulated was in 1977, and it was called, guess what? Nemesis. It was called Nemesis. And the idea that this also, which is maybe what made me make me think about Saturn in this respect, is also said to be a companion star to the sun. So that Nemesis kind of moves in this orbit. It's outside of the heliosphere, so it's in darkness, which is why you can't see it with telescopes. They're trying to home in on certain areas of the sky and see if they can find it. But they got a lot, they got a lot to pick through. It is almost like a needle in a haystack, given how far away this planet would be. But the motion of comets and other things, their orbits have been accurately predicted by this model, like every time. There's this accurate prediction. So they're like, yeah, there could be something to this theory. And the fact that we don't see a planet, by the way, doesn't mean, oh, well, we haven't seen it, so therefore it's just a myth and nobody's heard of it or whatever. Not necessarily. A lot of the planets, like, for example, when Uranus and Neptune, they were both postulated probably long before anybody actually was able to observe them. So yeah, it's a limit of our technology, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. Sometimes it's called Planet 9, sometimes it's called Planet X, depending on how you feel about Pluto. And a lot of astronomers say Pluto is a non-planet. But nonetheless, you understand the point here. You have these two objects that were both considered to be companions to the sun in some theory. The idea that these were both stars, perhaps these were both brown dwarfs that became these kinds of planets, and that somehow they have a role that interestingly seems to check the sun. If we think about sun energy as being like that Rahu energy I was talking about, the sun, astrologically, if I go back to where Rahu is in Hindu astrology and Vedic astrology, the sun is actually a malefic. It's not, we always think of the sun as it being a benefic. It actually has the force of a malefic for the same reason. Because the sun, it can shine brightly and positively on things, but it also can represent an over-aggrandizement of things in its worst aspects. When you have the sun and Rahu together in a chart, watch out. That's not typically a good combination. And especially if they're in Leo or something like that. If you believe in astrology, that's just not a good combination at all, because that's like unchecked narcissism, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. But you have this But that's the idea, is that you have these two stars, once really planets, but that might have been stars, that are there as a companion, in opposition, or a check to our central star. And that idea I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, it may only be something that we think about in terms of psychological associations. Maybe it's only something we're thinking about in terms of astrology or something like that, or even just mythologically. Nonetheless, I still think that's a really interesting idea, that you have these planets and so forth that are named, or the people want to name, and that their actual impact potentially within the solar system in a astronomical way, not just in an astrological one, might have been somehow comparable to what we are seeing in the mythology and the astrology connected to these things. So I just find it interesting. And Nemesis, by the way, when it apparently, I don't know how big its orbit is. It's like 30 million years or something. I mean, this is all postulated, but and it's supposedly what it does is when it goes into a certain movement, it can send a lot of comets towards the Earth. Nemesis could be a baby black hole too. Could be, although I think they're saying that the black hole theory, like what they're discovering, it doesn't hold as much. It's not checking out as much. It's not holding as much weight as the planetary theory. But yeah, that has been postulated as well. But they were saying that, yeah, that what that's not adding up at the moment based on what they're actually seeing. So yeah, but that has been, and of course, if Nemesis was a black hole, that could be another whole way of thinking about it, right? So yeah, I don't know what it is towards the end of these live streams that I'm starting to feel like I'm going to cough. So I did that at the end of the last one, and I was like, yeah, we don't need to do that here. But anyway, thought this was just an interesting thing to think about, since this is what we covered in the last two live streams, and I always kind of like to riff off and think about other themes, and that was one that definitely had come into my mind. So yeah, so we're about 12:56. We're almost at 1 o'clock. So I'm probably going to close it with that. I think what I'm going to do is just close with what I started with, which was, if you are, it's a little bit of an announcement, but if you are somebody interested in registering for the ISFM, please try to let me know by Friday, Saturday that you're going to do that, even if you haven't enrolled yet, even if you're only going to enroll in 1 or 2 classes, because we need to figure out what we're actually going to do if we don't feel like we have enough students to run it. So I want to make sure I don't want to go and cancel anything if people actually do want to enroll and they're just like, oh no, I just haven't done it yet. So just if you could check in with me, my email is down in the description to this particular live stream on YouTube. So you can check in with me there and let me know if that's what you want to do. And I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. You're welcome. Have a great day. As well, Joanne, to you too. And yeah, I will be back next Wednesday. And of course, I'm on my Transition Life Coaching channel, usually on a daily basis, mostly daily basis, doing a morning coffee there at 6:30, well, 7:30 in the morning. Might go back to 6:30 at some point. But I hope everybody has a good day. And I will see everybody on the next live stream. So take care. Thanks for being here.